A teenage girl walks in silence through the dust of a burning city. Her hands are bound, her eyes fixed downward. Around her, soldiers shout in a language she doesn't understand. She doesn't scream. She learned days ago that screaming only makes them laugh. Her name is Zarya, 14 years old, daughter of a seamstress. And as of this morning, she is no longer a person. She is inventory. Behind her, a scribe marks something on parchment: age, height, physical condition. Everything catalogued with the same care a merchant uses for silk or grain. Zarya doesn't know it yet, but she's about to become part of the most efficient system of human conquest ever designed. Before we dive deeper into this, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? It amazes me every single time that a story this dark, from 8 centuries ago, still pulls us in from every continent. This is the spring of 1220. The place is Khorasan, in what is now Central Asia, and the empire rolling across it isn't just taking cities, it's taking futures. The Mongol conquests are famous for their speed, their brutality, their tactical genius. But there's a dimension of this empire that rarely makes it into the history books, not because it didn't happen, but because it was so systematic, so bureaucratically organized, that it challenges our understanding of what ancient warfare actually looked like. What happened to women like Zarya wasn't collateral damage. It wasn't the chaos of battle. 'Twas policy. Documented, refined, expanded across 2 continents. And the architect of this system was a man who understood something other conquerors missed: that the real way to conquer a people wasn't just to defeat their armies, it was to rewrite their bloodlines. His name was Temujin. The world would come to know him as Genghis Khan. But to understand how he built an empire, not just of territory, but of biology itself, we need to go back to where it started. Not in triumph, in humiliation. Temujin was born in 1162 into a world where survival meant violence, and violence meant survival. His tribe was weak, constantly harassed. His father was poisoned by rivals when Temujin was only 9. His mother Holland was left with children to feed and no protection. They ate wild roots, caught fish with their bare hands, slept in the open. The lesson Temujin learned wasn't about honor or destiny. It was simpler, harsher. The world is divided into those who take and those who are taken. At 16, he faced the moment that would define everything. His betrothed, Bert, was kidnapped by a rival tribe. For months, he searched. Every day that passed, he imagined what was happening to her. Every night, he heard rumors. She'd been violated. She'd been passed between men. She was already dead. When he finally found her, Bert was alive. But she was pregnant. Temujin never asked whose child it was. He accepted the boy as his own. But something crystallized in him during those months of searching. Something cold. Women weren't just prizes. They were the future. They were continuity. And whoever controlled them didn't just win the present war. They won the next generation. Other Khans took captives and forgot about them. Temujin began to see them as infrastructure. By the time the tribes proclaimed him Genghis Khan in 1206, he'd already started experimenting. Not with weapons, with systems. The first real test came in 1209 against the Tonga Kingdom. And what the Mongols did there was unlike anything seen before. They didn't just attack, they prepared. Weeks before the siege, spies slipped into Tangut cities. They weren't counting soldiers, they were counting women. Ages, family structures, physical traits, all of it written down, archived. When the city fell, the Mongols didn't descend into random looting. They organized. Men were executed or enslaved, but the women, they were sorted. Category 1, ages 14 to 30, healthy, no visible defects. These were marked with ink on their wrists. Category 2, ages 31 to 40, preferably with children already, proving fertility. Category 3, everyone else. The first two groups were loaded into wagons. The third group was left behind. Most didn't survive the week. These weren't just prisoner caravans. They were mobile processing centers. Each wagon had a purpose. One held the newly captured, kept separate to prevent coordinated resistance. Another held those already confirmed pregnant. A third was for women who'd recently given birth. Mongol physicians traveled with the army, not to treat wounded soldiers, to monitor reproductive health. They tested herbs that might increase ovulation, adjusted diets to boost fertility, even attempted crude surgeries to repair damage that might prevent pregnancy. This wasn't cruelty for its own sake. It was cruelty with a goal. Every woman was assigned a number, tattooed or branded. No names, just identification codes. Origin, reproductive status, estimated value. Some women whispered their real names to their babies, hoping the sound might survive. Others carved marks into their own skin to remember who they'd been. But the system was designed to erase identity. And it worked. By 1211, when Genghis Khan turned his full attention to the Jin Empire in northern China, the machinery had been perfected. After the siege of Jiangdu, modern-day Beijing, Mongol records show more than 40,000 women of childbearing age were taken. By 1213, the caravans stretched for miles. Over 100,000 women, moving like a shadow army behind the soldiers. The process had become industrial. Capture, classify, condition, impregnate, birth, reassign. Newborns faced their own sorting. Mongol physicians examined each infant. Those with features they deemed sufficiently Mongol, lighter skin. Certain facial structures were taken from their mothers and raised in Mongol households. The rest were killed at birth. Mothers who resisted were dealt with according to protocol. Refusal to eat, force feeding until the will broke. Attempted abortion, constant surveillance, shackles if necessary. Self-mutilation to become infertile, kept alive as a warning to others. And the most heartbreaking act of all, mothers who killed their own newborns rather than let them be taken were tortured publicly. Slowly, their suffering turned into theater, ensuring no one else would follow. Genghis Khan had transformed conquest into biology. He wasn't satisfied with controlling land because land could be lost. But genes were permanent. Every pregnant captive was a seed of irreversible conquest. By 1220, when Zarya was taken, the system had reached its most refined form. The Mongol invasion of the Khwarezmian Empire wasn't just military, it was a harvesting operation. Cities like Bukhara, Samarkand, and Merv fell not only to siege weapons, but to protocols perfected over a decade. Intelligence networks mapped not just defenses, but families, which women had valuable skills, which had noble blood, which had strong emotional ties that could be exploited. After capture, the sorting was even more precise. Noble women were separated immediately, not out of mercy, but calculation. They were violated by high-ranking officers and given marginally better conditions. Why? Because their children, carrying refined genetic traits and aristocratic features, could be absorbed into Mongol leadership more easily. Peasant women were processed in bulk. Their value was in endurance, the ability to survive pregnancy under brutal conditions and produce strong children. The caravans themselves evolved. Each had divisions: initial capture, early pregnancy, late pregnancy, childbirth units with Mongol midwives, infant care, postpartum recovery, or more accurately, postpartum reassignment. Every division had its own administrators, guards, and medical staff. These weren't improvised prison camps. They were mobile cities of systematic dehumanization. Women found ways to resist even when resistance seemed impossible. They developed coded gestures to share information, warnings about escape routes, methods to induce miscarriage using herbs they'd hidden. Some deliberately starved themselves to disrupt their cycles. Others created rituals of memory, songs and languages the Mongols didn't understand, names repeated like prayers in the darkness. These acts never appeared in official records, but they were real, were survival. The Mongols documented everything except this: the quiet defiance of women who refused to let themselves be completely erased. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, the system didn't die with him. His sons inherited it, expanded it. Genghis Khan carried it into Europe. Mongol Khan applied it in the Middle East. Kublai Khan integrated it into the social structure of China itself. What began as military tactics became dynastic tradition. At Genghis Khan's funeral, 40 virgins were buried alive with his body, an offering to accompany him into the afterlife. But that was just ceremony. The real funeral offering came in the thousands of women from the caravans who were executed during the transition of power to prevent uprisings. Their bodies were buried in mass graves, organized with the same bureaucratic precision that had defined their captivity. Centuries later, archaeologists began finding them. Excavations across Central Asia uncovered mass graves of young women, often separated from male burial sites. Their skeletons showed chronic malnutrition, untreated fractures, signs of forced marches. Beside them, the hastily buried remains of infants and small children, none given the ritual treatment typical of Mongol culture. Near Bukhara, one grave held a discovery that stopped researchers cold. A woman and a teenage girl, buried side by side. DNA analysis confirmed they were mother and daughter. The mother had lived locally her entire life, but the daughter? Her bones showed she'd traveled vast distances before death, dragged across the empire in those endless caravans. Somehow, impossibly, they'd ended up in the same earth. Their circle complete. These aren't legends, they're forensic evidence. Proof that the system was real, organized, vast. And modern genetics confirms its effectiveness. Analysis of the Y chromosome shows that roughly 16 million men alive today descend directly from Genghis Khan and his immediate male relatives. That's 1 in every 200 men on Earth. In Mongolia, nearly 8% of the population carries this genetic signature. In Central Asia, around 3%. Even in Eastern Europe, far from the Mongol heartland, the markers remain. This is measurable conquest, not of cities, but of bloodlines. But numbers can't capture what it meant. Behind every genetic statistic is a girl like Zarya, 14 years old, stripped of her name, reduced to a mark on a wrist and a line in a ledger. Behind every percentage is a mother who whispered her real name into her baby's ear, hoping against hope that the sound might survive even if she didn't. Behind every archaeological site is a woman who carved symbols into her own skin to remember who she'd been before the system tried to erase her. The genius of Genghis Khan wasn't just military, it was biological. He understood something profound and horrifying, that conquest could be written not just in maps and monuments, but in the DNA of populations, that the womb could be weaponized, that reproduction itself could be controlled, cataloged, and turned into imperial infrastructure. Other empires rose and fell, but this one didn't need to hold territory forever. It had already implanted itself into the future. Every child born into the system was a living victory, a conquest that no battlefield defeat could ever reverse. The Mongol Empire eventually fragmented. The dynasty faded. The caravans disappeared, but the consequences never did. Centuries later, in archives across Eurasia, researchers find fragments. A physician's notes on fertility herbs, a ledger recording the processing of captives, a brief mention in a chronicle of women distributed among the princes. And in the earth itself, the silent graves, mothers and daughters, women and infants. Bones that carry no names but tell stories archaeology is only now learning to read. The voices of these women were left out of the official histories. But they survive in pieces, in songs passed down through generations that no one quite remembers the origin of, in genetic markers scattered across continents, in the archaeological record of mass graves that challenge every comfortable narrative about ancient warfare. What happened to Zarya? Whether she survived, whether she ever saw her mother again, whether her children remembered her name, we'll never know. The system was designed to ensure we wouldn't. But we know she existed. We know thousands like her existed. And we know that the empire they were forced to build didn't just conquer their present, it conquered their futures. This is the untold side of the Mongol legacy. Not the glory of horses and arrows and tactical brilliance, but the systematic transformation of human bodies into instruments of permanent conquest. An empire written not in gold or stone, but in blood and genes and the whispered names of those who refuse to be forgotten. History isn't only written by victors. Sometimes it's written in the bones of the vanquished. In the DNA of millions who walk the earth today. In the fragments of memory that survive despite everything designed to erase them. And sometimes, 8 centuries later, we finally learn to read what they left behind.